Hello, everyone, and welcome to Can I Be Blunt, where every week, or more realistically, whenever I want to, I chat with sex workers, psychologists, authors, and members of the BDSM community about topics ranging from femdom, DS relationships, online sex work, and much more. I'm Mistress Danielle Blunt, a professional dominatrix and co-founder of Hacking Hustling, and I'm joined today with my very esteemed guest, longtime friend, and author, Tina Horn, as well as with an advanced copy of her newest book, Why Are People Into That? A Cultural Investigation of Kink. Welcome, Tina. I would love if you could introduce yourself and tell us just a little bit more about your new projects.
Well, what is there to say about me besides the fact that I'm a Blunt super fan, um, ready to just like, what does she say in Scum Manifesto? Like, I'm ready to swim upstream through a river of snot, like, just for the chance to like touch the hem of your garment. Uh, who am I? My name is Tina Horn. I am a writer and like identifying as an educatrix. I'd love to know what you think of that word. Not something I came up with, but something I stole from somebody else. And longtime sex worker and media maker, podcaster myself. My podcast, long running indie DIY fetish podcast, Why Are People Into That, is now a book. I got to get you this hardcover copy. You've got the
Oh,
galley.
sure. I was holding it upside down, so I'm glad that I'm not.
Well, with the bisexual lighting, you can invert it however you please, twist it however you please. This one has a cute picture of me,
Ooh.
by Alex Kacha, and some blurbs on the back. Anyway, yeah, this is an exciting object. Yeah, so why are people into that? A cultural investigation of kink is based on my podcast in the sense that the premise that I came up with for the podcast is the same premise of the book, right? So in the podcast, the premise being explorations of sex, kink, gender, and love from the perspective of, sort of by and for sluts, whores, perverts, this sort of whore wisdom, slut wisdom, pervert wisdom. And with the podcast, it was a conversational show. You were on it in, I want to say like 2016, 2017. And then with the book, I have a master's in creative nonfiction writing. So more than adapting, making like a novelization of the podcast per se, this is more like a book of essays of cultural criticism. And my premise for the book and for writing the book was to, like as a writer, like sentences are my craft. And so I really wanted to push myself to the height of my ability as a prose stylist and as an essayist. And so I sort of took the same premise of the podcast and decided, okay, well, I'm going to do whereas I might have done like a conversation episode of the podcast about feet. Now I'm going to write an essay about feet and how we talk about foot fetishism in the culture, in our culture, and then how we talk about fetishism in general, how that could change. Like, it's definitely not an instruction book about kinky sex, but I'm 100% sure, guaranteed that your sex life will improve if you read my book. But that's not the purpose of the book. The purpose of the book was me getting to do whatever I wanted. That's not really true, but anytime. I mean,
Creative projects I feel like come from when you have like the space to like really dive deeply into the projects that you want. And I feel like just like being like a super fan and a participant with your podcast, I feel like also gabbing is one of your gifts and just like engaging people in conversations. And so for me, when I was reading the book, it was first, I like already know a bunch of like clients that I want to give it to and can like definitely see the way that your expertise and like deep diving into these different BDSM topics, these different fetish topics can help people like understand themselves and like place their kink in culture in a way that I think is inherently going to help people like embrace their kinks. And like I think there's like some like anti-stigma work and anti-shame work that's like really present in that cultural investigation that I feel like is important. And I don't think we just need like this is a how-to manual. You know, I think this is like an equally important part of the Edu-trix job to be providing that insight. But I think part of what was so exciting about for me reading the book is that your podcast is already so exquisite and in depth, and I think like highlights your ability to really dive deeply with someone and like get to the root of like what someone specific is interested in. And I feel like the book sort of like you're talking about allows you to explore your writing craft in a really deep way, kind of like balancing the two of like being able to deep dive with an individual as well as like deep dive with culture more broadly. And I know you love words of affirmation, so really this is just space for me to shower you with it and my words of affirmation as a kink praise for you. But I really feel like the evolution from the podcast to the book is really interesting. And I'm curious about like what that process was like for you, because I see it as two very, very different skill sets of yours, of which you're like equally gifted. And I'm wondering what it was like to give yourself more time and space away from the podcast and doing this like deep cultural dive. So yeah, just wondering if you could tell me a little bit about what the process was like going from this podcast with this like one-on-one intimacy that like you're really good of like culling out of people and getting people to open up. I feel like is a tremendous skill set of yours, and moving into what seems like a more isolated academic investigation for your new book. And I'm curious like what that transition was like, what you were able to learn in this sort of more academic deeper dive than with chatting with people and how they kind of interplay.
I mean, the thing about, I guess the best way to describe it is that the podcast is having scenes with people and the book is jerking off. So I'm selling tickets to the solo show, the toy show. Um, yeah, I mean, did you feel that way when you were reading the book that you were watching me jerk off?
I always feel like I'm watching you jerk off, if we're being
Good
completely
answer. That's the only real answer, yeah.
um no, I think I could feel you building off of the podcast in your book, but I think there is something about the book, not even like isolated as in like it's just about you, but it seems like you're both going broader and putting things together for yourself rather than being in like you're in conversation with yourself, your intellect, all of like your past experiences with sex work, with education, with your podcast, and you're kind of like weaving it together. Like it's not memoir, but there is so much of like your personal experience and expertise in that frame that it's just such a different approach than like deep dives one-on-one with individuals. And so I'm wondering how that process was different for you after spending so many years interviewing people and getting to have those one-on-one dynamics. And I guess I'm thinking about it for myself too, as someone who does like one-on-one very intimate work as a sex worker and also does research where it's just like a completely different set of expertise and interest and just a very, very different experience.
Yeah, these are all such beautiful big thoughts from your big engorged brain, and I love them so much. You know, one of the things that I've been saying about the book since I was working on it with my literary agent and pitching it to publishers is that part of the project of the book is seeing sex as something that you can be a connoisseur of. And I don't mean a sexpert. I don't mean a sex geek. I mean, like, in the same way that, like, someone who enjoys a fine cigar would read Cigar Aficionado magazine, and there are going to be articles in there that are going to be like, here's the gear that you can get for your cigar collection. Here's the humidor. Here, here's a taste test by an expert who really knows what the fuck they're talking about in terms of different kinds of cigars. And here's a celebrity who is a cigar enthusiast. And like, here's a little bit of history, and here's a little bit of like cigars appearing in a recent television show, all of these different things. And like, same thing with foodies, the same thing with people who love sports, right? Like, we have so much space in culture and media for, even politics. Like, we have so much space. Even just think about like every single different like section of a magazine, fashion, right? Like, we have space for people who know a lot about something and are enthusiasts and also skilled writers who can capture or explore or like simmer in their enthusiasm for cigars or politics or sports or shoes or whatever. And then other people who may be enthusiasts on the same level as the writer, may be curious new enthusiasts who want to become aficionados, people who really only have like a passing interest in it and would read about it and maybe not actually like buy a cigar or cook a meal or go to Chez Panisse or whatever, like might want to read an article or read a book by somebody who knows what the fuck they're talking about, enjoying talking about it. And I mean, that's me in a nutshell, right? Like, I enjoy talking about the things that I enjoy. If I like it, I like talking about it. I even like talking about talking, which is, I guess, what we're doing now. Talking, my favorite topic. So yeah. It's maybe a little corny to say that like, why are people into that is like, I'm with the project of why are people into that, the book, I'm trying to become like as Michael Pollan is to plants, like I am to kinky sex. But like, that is kind of the idea, and there's a mission behind that, which is that it fucking sucks that we don't think about sex along with all of those other topics. Like, sex has unique qualities that make it different from anything else, but it also is so ripe with allegorical potential because it's so emotional, because it's so physical, because it's because it has physical and abstract components to it, because it is related to so many things that are so important to us. And that's probably why I'm a sexual enthusiast, is that I'm really actually just an allegory enthusiast. And sex is, you can talk about sex in comparison to music, you can talk about sex in comparison to food, you can talk about sex in comparison to like physical athletic achievements, you can talk about it in comparison to anything that you want. And I try to do that because I find that sometimes when I'm talking to people about BDSM or sex work, and I'm like, well, do you ever think about group sex like an orchestra, like a symphony? And people are like, huh, I never thought about it like that. I'm like, oh, that's just how I think about it. So if that's helpful to people, that this book represents the way that I think about sex, kink, gender, and love. So if that's helpful to people, that's great. But above all, what I want is to entertain people. Like, I'm an entertainer. That's what's in my blood. I want to show people a good time. So I put a lot of hard work into not only knowing what I know in this book, like telling you the difference between water-based, silicone-based, and oil-based lube in terms of sensation, in terms of safer sex, in terms of different holes. And then also, like, here's a really funny story about a submissive client who liked to hide the session fee and cash all around the room and be interrogated to reveal the location of the cash, and like how that is related to the transactional nature of sex work, and like the identifying like the cash is like the realest thing in the room, the sort of like meta context of what is going on in the room, and using that as a prop to animate a fantasy. But also, like, I just spend a lot of time knowing how to make sentences, and like every single sentence is this book in every single sentence in this book is like meticulously like carved out of marble. So I hope that people like it. I hope that it sparks every part of their body, because that's the other thing about writing about sex, is that there's often either pressure from, a publisher or an editor, or internalized pressure, or, some sort of sense from society that nonfiction writing about sex shouldn't appeal to prurient interest. And so much of that really comes down to like fear, the fear of the pornographic and the fear of obscenity, which I have a feeling that you might agree with me that really just can be boiled down to whorephobia.
Great transition. I feel like you hit on like all of my questions I want to ask you, but
I'm just topping from the bottom.
Well, you're the only one who I'll allow that. So,
you can drink to that. This is coffee, by the way.
The term sexual connoisseur. I think of myself as one, I suppose, when I'm making people give taste of my pussy, and I'm like, let me expand your palate. Like, let's get real serious about how my pussy tastes.
Can we talk about something?
About how my pussy tastes?
I don't know how your pussy tastes, but maybe we should change that. I at least would love that. Oh, great. I mean, I just really would like, even if I can just get a good whiff, good, like the bouquet.
Got you.
I guess I should have maybe rifled through your laundry. Maybe the next time I am.
My laundry when you were staying at my place, I left a pair of panties just for you.
Did you point them out to me?
They had your name written all over them. No.
That's such a mommy move, the sewing your name into the
lock bag in the refrigerator, so just don't forget to take them with you when you go to the sex party.
I like open it. It's like not freeze dried. What is it called? Vacuum sealed.
Yeah.
I have like vacuum sealed blunt panties, and I just like show up to the function and like open it, and it's like, you read the book Perfume, the Story of a Murder?
Okay, we're going on a tangent here. The
thing that I really wanted to say is that, speaking of porn, I have been thinking lately that it's really a damn shame that I have been I never like officially retired from porn. I just like kind of haven't made it in a while, and I never got on the OnlyFans bandwagon, but really think of I think very highly of myself and my attractiveness, but I really do feel like my most beautiful body part is my pussy. I really feel like my pussy is perfect, and like plenty of worthy people get to enjoy that all the time, but the world should really be able to enjoy. Like, I just want people to know.
Photo in the dust jacket. Too late.
This book written by this cunt,
Tina Horn's cunt.
Tina Horn. Yeah, I have to make a new social media. And yeah, everybody's like, "Oh, Tina Horn's ass. It's her most famous and noticeable asset." And it's like, well, people don't know.
Little do you know.
Fucking walking around with the world's most perfect pussy in here. Anyway, um,
So you, yes, sexual connoisseur, and also like I really think that there's something exquisite about this book because it's like neither how to, it's not like memoir, it's not like trying to convince you of anything. I think it really does fill a gap in kink literature of why, like both like why are people into that, and as well as like how does culture make us into the things that we're into, which I feel like is super important. And when you were talking about like these other authors who are like experts and like do these like really intense deep dives into like what their expertise are and like have space to do those deep dives because it is culturally acceptable to do that, I feel like they often have, I feel like it's best when they have personal experience. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how your experience and expertise as a sex worker has impacted your approach to this work. And also, just like, God, I saw a tweet that was just like, if you're a sex educator and haven't been a sex worker, like, I don't have anything to learn from you. And I just like very much like feel that way. And so I'm curious if you could chat a little bit about, um, yeah, how your experience as a sex worker contributed to like the evolution of the podcast into this book, and like why you think it adds to your work, and like the approach of like by and for, uh and how it just strengthens work.
I love this question. You know, I have a very good friend who has been with her partner for over 10 years, and they recently opened up their relationship, and so she's having a real slut era right now, which is very beautiful to support her through. Not like she needs any help from me, but and mostly just like to hear all the great stories and to feel compersion for her, to feel like happiness for my friend having all of these great adventures. And it's so interesting to hear her talk about meeting new people, and she's also having more queer experiences than she has had before, and definitely being like, yeah, just like a total bisexual slut out there. And like it's interesting to hear her talk about the different things that she's considering, even in terms of like group sex. She's like going to sex parties for the first time and having threesomes for the first time. And she'll kind of talk about something in the context of like, well, I don't know if I want to try this because it doesn't turn me on. And hearing her say that, I had this kind of light bulb moment, which it's nice to know that there's still some like light bulbs that I just felt like they were, all the floodlights have just been like on, and I'm like, why can't I sleep? But I had this new fresh light bulb moment of realizing that like I don't need, being turned on is not a prerequisite for me to try something sexually. And so going back to sex work, part of what I'm saying is that I think that sex work appealed to me in my early 20s because on some level I knew that about myself, because I had such a insatiable appetite for experience that I knew by my early 20s that I didn't want to wait around for, first of all, like all of the like time consuming shit about like dating and getting to know people and intimacy and romance, um but also like I didn't want to wait around to like make sure that my partners wanted to try something and like have all of those negotiations. Like I wanted to experience as much as I possibly could. And so being a sex worker, that was it was a good quality for being a sex worker, because it also helped me to compartmentalize like the parts of my sexuality that are for me, and to see, I think that it made me well suited to sex work because I understood the work part of sex work really early, and like separating that, like I would be doing sexual things, naked things, fantasy things, fetish things with people, and it was very clear to me that it was work. And I feel so grateful that it only took a couple of years for me to be for me to wake up to the realization of like how much privilege I had to even be able to like see it that way. And also to be able to say all of the shit that I said in my first few years of working, of like, it's the best paid improv gig in town, and like, you know, like, if I'm going to be a slut anyway, I might be able to get paid for it. Like, you know, those things are true. And what was also true is that I needed the money. And it was an opportunity that I sought out, and it was an opportunity that was available to me. And I'm so fortunate that because I was working in the mid-aughts in the Bay Area, that sex work was inextricable from that the labor was inextricable from community from the beginning. And the more I worked, the more I realized that, and the more that I knew that I wanted to give as much as I was taking in terms of that. And to your question about like education and being, this is a part of why I call myself an Edu-trix, is that I always say that my first workshops, my first time like being a sex educator, was training new girls at the dungeon the way that more experienced people had trained me. And like, you know, you learn a few knots, and you learn not to hit someone, not to flog someone in the kidneys, and like you learn how to clean a sink full of dildos with maticide without inhaling too much maticide, and then then you're like in the field. It would be great actually to have a dungeon that was just like in a big field, just like
Open air dungeon. It'd be great for COVID.
yes, it would be great for COVID. I mean, it would be great for me. I'm such an outdoors kid. I mean, the first scene that comes to mind for me is like a most dangerous game scene where you're out in an open field and somebody just has to run,
Were you,
be
I don't know
hunted.
if you were involved in this. There was someone at the place that I trained who had this like very hot fantasy of wanting to be oiled up like a little piggy and chased around by doms on an ATV. And whoever caught him got to do whatever they wanted to. And I'm just like, I think about that so often.
It's great. Yeah,
Right?
you should absolutely do that. I actually did a live wire people into that event that I'm finally editing the footage from and will probably release soon, where I had people put, it was with Chingy, who's been a guest on the show a few times, and and is very funny. And we had audience members put questions in a hat so that they could ask anonymously. And someone asked, "Why are people into being hunted?" So this is kind of on my mind. It would be
Well,
it would be
I
fun.
have a question that feels related. I feel like the most burning question that I have for you today is, why is Tina Horn into, why are people into that? I'm so curious because I feel like so much of your work is figuring out why people are into that. And I'm curious about why you're so interested, where this interest comes from. Like, is there a relationship between like this intellectualizing and cultural investigation of kink that is part of your sex life and like understanding of your own sexuality? But like, I want to do the podcast episode of like, why are you so into what other people are into and what does it do for you?
I mean, that's kind of pervert I am. Yeah, I mean, uh, what a great homo question. I mean, the way that my brain works is very conceptual, and I don't say that as a like I'm smarter than people. Like I'm very I have a very hard time with physical and technical things, like figuring out devices and gear, for example. I don't have any intuition for like engineering. I'm like only just now at this point in my life, like learning to keep succulents alive and grow tomatoes. Like I'm not I don't have a lot of, I mean, at this point, I think I can say I have some intelligence at working with my hands, but that came from lots and lots of practice in sex work. And, but yeah, I'm good at working with bodies physically, but not
No
with.
self-deprecation needed. Just talk about like you're good at shit.
Well, thank you. But I guess what I'm trying to emphasize by contrast, or trying to explain by contrast, is that like I've also had this feedback from writing teachers that they're like, you need to include more concrete detail. And I'm like, well, but I like reading theory. I like reading about concepts. I like reading about politics. I like reading about things that like don't appeal to the five senses that you can't like hold in your hand. And so it's actually been something that I have had to push myself out of my comfort zone to be able to write as I do in this book, in some cases, like describing a scene, setting a scene, so that you can like know what it looks like and what things sounded like and what things smell like, um, and how things feel on a sensory level. So yeah, when it comes to being involved in sex culture, as a fetish worker, as a pornographer, as a teacher, as a writer, as a podcaster, it's just what I gravitate towards and what I like. I like the why more than the how. And I think sometimes when there's so much emphasis on the how, people don't have any fantasy fuel to motivate them to develop their technique and their finesse. The term contact in the quote from my book that you just read so beautifully, it's nice to hear my prose in your mouth. Um,
Anytime you like.
read to me, like read me a bedtime story of my own writing. Anyway, this term contact comes from Samuel R. Delany, who is one of my heroes, writer of absolutely disgusting smut, wonderful, influential sci-fi, and also queer theory. So you can see why he's my role model. And he has this classic book called Times Square Red, Times Square Blue, which I just happen to have right here lying around. And when he talks about contact in that book, he's talking about interclass contact in Times Square and in like the 70s and 80s, like pre-gentrified, pre-Giuliani, pre-Disneyfied Times Square. And speaking of the happy hooker versus damaged goods sex work dichotomy, it's important that we not over-idealize how liberatory it was for Sam Delaney, as he writes about in this book, and how much I wish that I could like take the Uptown train and hang out with people and watch porno in a big movie theater and like get a blowjob, give a blowjob, jerk off, eat some popcorn, drink a beer, whatever. Obviously, there was also plenty of suffering and violence in Times Square at the time. But part of the point of sex worker rights is figuring out how to provide people with the services that they need in the situations that they have, instead of just like paving paradise and putting up a parking lot, right? Which is what Giuliani did. And that doesn't keep anybody safe. It doesn't make anybody happier. And I guess maybe this is like another answer to your question about like what makes me unique in what I bring from sex work to my writing. probably more than the average sex worker. And again, this is a place of privilege, but like I identify with my clients. Like I am also a pervert. I mean, you alluded to this with saying that you love creepy foot guys, because you yourself being a creepy foot guy, right? And so like I believe that it's important that we have spaces for people to make porn and to produce porn, to screen porn, to get together in that sort of sexual extrovert space to watch porn, to cruise. Obviously, these are incredibly liberatory spaces for queer connection. But this idea of contact is not just, I need somewhere to go and get off. It is that. And there's a cue that I take from Sam Delaney's writing is that you can talk about politics, you can talk about theory without feeling like shackled by or suppressed by respectability politics, or feeling like you have to like drain the raunchiness or drain the horniness from your writing in order to be taken seriously, right? So that's one way that I try to keep Delaney's legacy alive with my work. But I think that this idea of contact is so connected to what you're saying, where as we're continuing to try to learn and teach about sex and try to think about the role of sex in politics and society and culture, and what that has to do with reproductive rights, and what that has to do with labor rights, and what that has to, all of the different things that sexuality touches, we can't be so up our own asses about finding a place to jerk off and get our needs met and be satisfied, to not recognize all of the sort of post-structuralist, like hegemonic systems that are influencing our desire and our experiences. And we can't be so focused on the bigger picture that we forget the role of our own pleasure and entertainment and intimacy in liberation. So I guess what I'm saying is, can women have it all? Can we liberate ourselves and our comrades and a person next to us in the CD porno theater? I'd like to think so. But we have to care. Like, I guess we have to be horny. We have to be horny for liberation. I don't know. I want to say that in a way that has substantial meaning and is not just sloganeering, like, in this house we believe that pleasure is liberation or whatever. Like, I want us to be aware of, as much as we might be like driven to get off, we need to put that sex drive into helping everyone get free together and making the world a better place. I don't know. What do you think, Blunt?
So apt about like just how capitalism alienates you from your body, and like the continuation of these like structures of domination necessitate workers to be in a constant state of disassociation. And I think that there is something that is like that can be inherently liberatory about practices that bring you deeply into community, that bring you deeply into your body, and that bring you deeply into contact and into like relationality with other people, where you're not limited by the structures of the church and state, and you're finding new ways of being together and being in your body and not engaging in work, and not
And
engaging.
also contact with people. And what is so crucial to Delaney's concept of contact, and what he talks about in Times Square Red, Times Square Blue, is crucially it's interclass contact. It's contact with people who are different from you. And, you know, and part of how we can see the idea of making those connections in a physical place like Times Square contrasted with what we are living with now, in the way that tech corporations are siloing us into our algorithmic feedback loops to sell us things and keep us confused, which is working on me. I'm very confused and frustrated with technology all the time. And that's actually one place that I
a lot too is like sometimes the most like therapeutic part of like doing a session with me is that neither of us are on our phone for 3 hours. Like, when was the last
yeah.
time you've like put your phone on airplane mode and just like been with someone else? I feel like it's so easy, even in intimate relationships, to just not take that step and still be like connected and pulled and being advertised to and like still working and like laying in bed with a lover and like sending a work email. It's like, oh, it's just like one more email. And I think that there's something really powerful about that presence. And I think, I don't know, I think you can like read your book as like a cultural investigation or a deep dive or like a meditation into the like whys and like really like indulging your curiosity of to like why are people into that. It's such a pervy question in and of itself, so it's fun that you get to just like expound on that in your book. And so I guess as like, I don't know if you have anything to add to my question about fascism, but like as we're wrapping up, I just want to know, like, after finishing so many huge projects in such a short amount of time, A, how? B, are you a masochist? And C, is there anything you're working on now and does it involve rest?
Mhm. Yes, I'm a glutton for punishment in every way. Um, yes, I care very much about rest. I consider rest to be a part of hedonism. And like I'm pleasure seeking. Part of the pleasure that I'm seeking is the pleasure of sleeping in and also regulating and restoring and taking care of myself so that I can continue to seek the stimulation that I want as I age. I was listening to a movie podcast recently where they were talking about Barbra Streisand and how Barbra Streisand considers herself lazy. And everyone's always like, Barbara, what are you talking about? Like, you're aware that you're Barbra Streisand, right? Like, you're not, that's ridiculous. You're not lazy. She's like, no, no, no. You don't get it. I am a perfectionist, but I'm a lazy perfectionist. And that's why she's only directed 5 movies over the course of like 3 decades, 4 decades. And why she's not constantly touring or putting out records. Because she's like, I know exactly how it has to be. And that's why people say I'm a diva, but I'm right. And it takes a lot of work not only to make the thing exactly the way that I know it needs to be, which is the correct way, my way, but also to like collaborate with others and to deal with other people not trusting me and to deal with like all of the other, like hell is other people, all of the other forces to like get it right. So I take on something that I know is worthwhile because I know that I have to. This is also the way that Barbara's not a Virgo; she's a Taurus. But this is one way that like my Virgo like perfectionism manifests. Like I actually could be quite sloppy, as you know. But when it comes to something like why are people into that, a cultural investigation of kink, like it's so meticulous because it has to be right, and I know how to manifest my vision, if you will, and deal with collaborators and also respect my collaborators and stay in my lane, respect their expertise and trust them, but also like stand up for what I expect from them. So like Barbra Streisand, I am a lazy perfectionist, and I right now I'm working on publicizing the book and going on book tour, which is something I love. I mean, I work on projects so that I can party about them.
I love
And I'm stoked that I'm doing a lot of events in dungeon spaces with local bookstores doing the sort of off-site vending. So like bringing in two of my favorite things, like bringing like small local bookstores into dungeons, and then bringing all the people who want to celebrate the book like into this space that is going to be like a hybrid of like literary salon and sexy kinky cabaret is going to be fun. So make sure that you're subscribed to my newsletter at tinahorn.net, and they follow me on the IG at Tina Horns Ass. That's TINAHORNSASS for all of those updates. And I mean, I want to keep teaching workshops. I love teaching workshops. I probably shouldn't say what I want my next book to be about, but something that I've been teaching about a lot lately, and I'll just say has to do with dark fantasies and supernatural allegories. So we'll see how that works out. But, you know, a nonfiction book proposal is a very in-depth sort of demo tape that could take a while. I also really want to write Safe Sex 3. You know, like I said, this is Safe Sex Volume 1 and Safe Sex Volume 2. Would like to make it a trilogy. What's that?
So good.
Thank you. Have some mad scientist ideas about what I want that next story to be. I'd like to make more of my Dyke detective thriller Deprog, and I'd like to bring the podcast back. You know, it's a lot of really hard work, as you know, because you're doing it right now. And
I have a very low labor approach to podcasting, so people can enjoy
good. Well, you're not alone.
whatever they're gonna get.
Yeah. I feel like since the podcast has been on hiatus, it's very much that lazy perfectionist thing where I'm like, if I can't make it the way that I want to make it, then I'd rather just go for a hike or like eat popcorn on my couch and watch a movie or have sex. But I'd like to bring the podcast back. I'd love to get some funding. So if anybody wants to bring the podcast back and wants to talk to me about money, I'd love to continue to build economic power. I'm going to be teaching writing on the university level this year. I love doing like public speaking. I don't know. I'm like trying to make it all happen. I just took a piercing intensive, so I've got more bloodlust than ever before.
I have more blood than ever
poke
before.
holes in people. Yes, you're making more for me right now.
Yes.
My blood bag.
I can feel it coursing through my body. Well, thank you so much for this conversation, and I hope people enjoyed where we got lost in horniness for each other. So you're welcome, and I'm sorry for derailing the conversation.
We always knew how to get. I was never lost. I took. We would take little detours into horniness, but we always had our bearings.
Right back. And if anyone's interested in finding me or my feet, feel free to Google me. Because all of my platforms are constantly changing. But thank you so much for chatting with me about this. I think everyone should go and buy your book, and I hope that you change your author photo to a photo of your cunt. Your beautiful cunt. Maybe for book 2.
Maybe for book 2.